New storytellers, and experienced ones to be honest with you, we're all prone to make mistakes. It's really no big deal, it's just part of learning the craft. But today I want to talk about 4 big mistakes that tend to get made, and you might be, especially if you're a newer writer, you're probably making at least one of these. So we'll talk about them and hopefully you can then avoid them. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for liking if you're finding value. Subscribe if you haven't done that. I really do appreciate it. Thank you for watching. There's some links below. Be sure to check those out. Let's not waste any more time. Let's jump in. There's one great thing about mistakes. When you make them and when you recognize you've made them, it helps you know that you're learning, that you're improving, because it's like, oh, I did this thing. I need to do that better. So I want to give you just 4 mistakes that new writers tend to make, and hopefully you can start to avoid these and your writing will hopefully start to just kind of jump up to another level. So here we go. One of the more common mistakes that I see, especially in new writers and new storytellers, is this: too much exposition. Now, exposition is simply information the audience needs to make sense of the story. So they need this, they need this, they need this. But what tends to happen is when we're starting to write, when we're starting to learn, and I was guilty of this too when I started, you just start dumping in all this information. And there are ways that you need to parse out some exposition. Like, you only give exposition when the audience needs it. You only give just enough information. It's kind of like you should only be answering the questions the audience is asking when you give the exposition, and you just give them that information and that's it. So a lot of times what happens is people will include so much exposition and it's like, okay, here's all this. What I want you to do is just look at that, and then however long it is, cut it in half. So if it was 4 lines on the page, okay, now cut it down to 2. It's like, okay. And after you cut it down to 2, then cut it down to 1. And now you're probably pretty close. So a lot of times we have just too much exposition, or we end up telling instead of showing, and that's another problem. So showing is really helpful in dealing with exposition, because if we're the audience and we're just watching your story and we see things, okay, now you're not telling us, we're just seeing this and this and this, and now we get a sense of the world without you having to tell us. If you see exposition, whenever you're doing expo, you just kind of want to be aware and maybe try to start cutting it down. The second common mistake is a lack of clarity in the story. If you've watched any of my videos, you've probably heard me say this. What a story is a story is about someone who wants something badly, they're having trouble getting it, and they get it or they don't. That's what a story is. It needs all of those components. It needs those 4 components. Someone, your main character, what are they going after, that they have trouble getting it, and we need to find out if they get it or not. Like, if you've got that, you at least have a complete story. So when you start out writing and you're starting to write a story or tell a story, you need to know those 4 things. And if you don't know them, you're going to start wandering off on tangents and chasing rabbits, and you're including this thing and that thing, and all of a sudden there's 15 subplots and all this. It's like, wait, time out. Clarity of the story. Let's just refocus on the story. So what you want to do is make sure you're not wandering off. So if your story is just sprawling, or you've written a screenplay and you're like, man, it's 180 pages. I just don't know how to cut it down. I can guarantee you have a lack of clarity in your story. So clarify your story, simplify your story into that kind of definition. Someone who wants something badly, they're having trouble getting it, and they get it or they don't. And if you can't articulate that for your story, you don't have a clear story. You don't know what your story really is. So you want to be able to clearly articulate that, and then let that inform what you write. Number 3 is a little more of a challenging one. And this is when you, as a writer, ignore the emotions of the audience. So when you're telling a story is fundamentally about emotions. You are taking your audience, whoever's reading it, whoever's watching it, you're taking them on an emotional ride. There's some hope, there's some fear, there's ups, there's downs, all these kinds of things, right? And you want to lead them through this. The problem is sometimes new writers are like, ooh, I need this, I need this, I need a funny moment, I need a sad moment, I need a funny moment, I need a sad moment, I need an introspective moment, I need a planning moment, and you start creating all these, and all of a sudden what you're doing is you're creating emotional whiplash for your audience. It's up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, and people are just exhausted by the time they get to the end. And you don't want that. You want them to feel like they've gone on a ride. You may still want them to be a little tired at the end, like, ooh, that was a really great adventure. That was a really great ride. But you don't want them to like have their neck hurting or anything like that. You want one emotion to lead to the next, to lead to the next, to lead to the next. So the emotions of your story, how the audience is feeling at different times, you should be moving them through the story, but it should be organic. This one, if I'm happy and I'm moving more sad, okay, I need to be aware of some of my happier moments. I might have a funny line here or there, but this is going to be a little more dramatic in a sense, right? It's going to be a little more serious, and then it might be a little more comedic. So you just want to make sure you are tracking and paying attention to the intended and anticipated emotions of the audience as they are watching or experiencing your story. And a lot of new writers and storytellers, they tend to forget this one. We're just like, ooh, I can make them feel this and make them feel this and make them feel this, and everything gets stacked together. It's like, I just don't care because you're giving me emotional whiplash. I can't track with why I'm happy here and sad here and all of that. So you want to make sure that you are tracking with the emotions of the story and that it's an organic way. So you want to start to learn to pay attention to the emotions of the audience. And that really gets to the last one, which is in many ways the most important one of these four. And that's this. One big mistake that storytellers, screenwriters make is they don't want to be fully vulnerable on the page when telling a story. When you tell a story, you are going to come out onto the page. Now, good writers let that happen. New writers tend to well, I don't know if I can say that. Can I say that? Can I not say that? And you start censoring yourself, and that's where it starts to be a problem. So you want to make sure you are willing to be vulnerable. And this is hard, and it takes practice, and it takes time, because in some ways you're kind of being emotionally exposed for other people. When they read your story, they're going to see part of your soul, part of what makes you you. For some of us, that's kind of scary because it's like, well, I've got some things I don't want other people to know. Well, if you're going to be a screenwriter, they're going to know. They're going to see it. It's going to leak out. You're not going to be able to keep it from leaking out. And that's okay. You need to learn to embrace that part of it. When I teach screenwriting to people, I will tell them, when you write, I want to see your beating, bleeding heart on the page, and I want the page to be dripping. That's what you want. You want to put your whole self into it. Don't censor yourself. Don't try to limit. Just write the story that you are seeing, that you are feeling. Put your whole self into it. You've got to be willing to be vulnerable. And if you're not willing to be vulnerable, you're going to have a hard time finding success as a screenwriter. You've got to be willing to be vulnerable. You've got to be willing to be, in some ways, exposed on the page. One other little part of this one is, if you are writing a story, any story, whatever it is, it needs to matter to you. You need to care about it. You need to be emotionally connected to it. Because if you're not emotionally connected to your own story, why would anyone else be? Why would they care if you don't? So you have to be willing to be emotionally connected to the story. And then when you go to tell it, now you've also got to be vulnerable. So you want to keep all of that in mind. That's all part of the whole being willing to be vulnerable on the page. Can you overcome all these mistakes? Absolutely. Sometimes it just takes practice. Sometimes it just takes time. Sometimes it'll trigger and you'll be like, as soon as you start writing exposition, it'll be like, oh, this is exposition. I probably don't need as much. So you can kind of start policing yourself on some of them. Some of them are just going to take some time. But if you can keep these in mind, it's really going to help you be a much better storyteller. Hopefully this has been helpful to you. If it has, please be sure to like, subscribe, bell. I really appreciate it. Thank you for doing that. And when you go to tell a story, you're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. But when you tell a story, you want to get this one right. You want to tell a story that matters. Thanks for watching. See you later.